Bitcoin is trading around $71,000 at the time of recording. There's a lot of speculation with the whole Strait of Hormuz being open or shut. My guess is that it's still closed. I think that the United States are basically just like saying whatever they can to basically look like they're winning the war, which in my opinion, I don't think is the case. You can see this all over the X platform. Obviously Trump has to look really, really good when it comes to all these kind of announcements. And that's not to be political or take sides. It's just the reality of the situation. I think that they really underestimated the power of Iran when it comes to just like sticking to their guns and just prolonging this sort of like conflict, if you want to call it that. And so obviously we saw gold go from basically, it's kind of like crashed down, which is kind of not what you want to see, or like it's very, very unprecedented to see like precious metals kind of selling off at a time of such like peak uncertainty where we come into like massive like oil surging. Obviously oil's gone from basically like $60 all the way up to like $120 down to $80. And it's kind of like chopped up and down around here. I do predict that we're probably going to see another surge in the oil price, because I do think that all these like rumors about the Strait of Hormuz coming open and being escorted by Trump and having insurance, I think that that's all just like positive like reinforcements. It's not actually the case. And so I think we're going to see something kind of get released where it's like that's not actually like going on, and that it's not relatively safe, because I think that it's very safe to say, without getting political, that the trust that's put behind Trump now is kind of like, it's just not the same, right? Like that he tries to play on like all these kind of like narratives that we're winning and all this kind of stuff. And, it's just like, I think that all these countries, they're not really happy with the way that the United States is handling things. And so even though he's saying that you can trust him and that there's insurance, like, I don't think that these ships are putting their, basically having these ships go on the routes, right? Like, I don't think that that's going to happen until there's more, set in stone kind of like security when it comes to these tanker ships or any sort of like importing and exporting ships, right? And so I think we're going to see a lot of volatility. I think that obviously Bitcoin looks to be a little bit strong right now. Just, you could make the case that there's so much like fiat kind of currencies kind of getting devalued against either like the dollar, maybe even like the yuan. You see like a lot of just like crippling economies. And so in a place of like uncertainty, it would make sense that people are buying Bitcoin just for the sole reason that it's a borderless kind of, currency that is probably like, obviously the price action has been very, very underwhelming as of late. But, obviously if you're putting that against like your current currency, if you're like in a third world country and you're just, a prey to hyperinflation, then obviously Bitcoin would make a lot of sense. And, in a world where we're basically like at conflicts, like left or right, doing, other countries' biddings, sanctions going up and down, it would make a lot of sense for people to basically go into Bitcoin, because, that would be, in my opinion, the best way to preserve your wealth, and just not lose your purchasing power. So, I'm not ready to call anything that we're out of the woods just yet. I still think we're going to see a lot of chop. I don't think that this war is any close to being, done. I think that this is going to be a prolonged sort of, route, right? I think that we're going to take some time here. I think there's going to be a lot of continuing trade agreements. I do think that most of the bigger trade agreements have already been done. And I think that what we're seeing is kind of like a route, if you will, of like how we're going to get to the certain like kind of trade agreements, right? Because in my opinion, I think that this whole like Strait of Hormuz route, when it comes to like the oil, obviously the UK is in shambles, right? Like they're not going to be able to basically supply, their country with oil. So they're going to be forced to be doing all these kind of like decade-long deals in a very unfavorable kind of term, because they have no choice. And I think it's going to be the same way for other countries with, certain supplies that they may need, because obviously China is a mammoth country that is a large net like exporter, right? And so a lot of countries depend on China for these sort of, whatever it is, right? Same thing with like the United States. We're a max importer, so like we import a lot of our stuff. Now, obviously that's been trying to change as of late, but who knows how long that's going to take. And then obviously you have like Russia supplying oil to different countries. And so I think this is all just posturing to see who's going to side on what side, right? So with that being said, I do predict a lot of volatility. I would not be leverage trading. I would not be doing anything other than just sticking to like a long-term kind of perspective, because, the price of oil can chop up and down. And if it does go towards like $150, that's really, really scary in terms of like the United States going into like a recession. So it's just not good for anybody, right? And nor is this war, right? I think that every single country, there's nothing or no country that stands to benefit from this. So I think that it's all just noise. I think that that's why it hasn't escalated to a certain massive extent, right? But I do think that, like I said, I think that the United States like overplayed their hand, and I think that this is just going to be a dragged out, prolonged thing. I hope that troops are not, going in on the ground and all that, because that would just be, in my opinion, like not ideal. I don't know. I don't want to get political, but it all affects, like everything affects everything, right? And so I think that, if you're somebody that's just kind of like an investor, then just kind of like survive. That's what I've been telling all my friends. They're like, hey man, like what should I be doing? Should I be buying, selling? Should I be, whatever the case may be? I'm like, dude, just like, honestly speaking, like I don't know what's going to go on. Like I can only kind of predict like based off of past sort of scenarios, but like everything is just very news driven right now. Like we're basically hanging on like a Truth Social post from Trump, like, oh, we're doing this, we're doing that. And whether the case is like that, remains to be seen, right? Because like I said, I do think that this whole like Strait of Hormuz is a bigger issue than what's being led on. And I think that he's trying to posture as if everything's safe. I do not think that's the case. And I think until that is solidified, that, that's going to be opened, we're going to see a lot of volatility. So with that being said, make sure you subscribe, turn on your bell notifications. I will be continuing to update you guys with whatever I'm seeing in basically the news, the charts, everything moves very, very quickly. So with that being said, have a great day, guys. Bye.